On America's endless highways, the night has its own language. Static, hum, and the low voice of engines pushing through fog. Truckers hear things the rest of us ignore. Voices bleeding through dead CB channels. Signs that appear twice. Towns that no longer exist. Tonight on Fear Line, 10 long-haul drivers share what happened when the road itself began to listen back. From Wyoming's frozen stretches to Nevada's silent way stations, their stories trace a pattern of whispers and vanishings no logbook ever recorded. Keep your mirrors clean, your coffee hot, and your headlights steady. Because the next voice on Channel 19 might be calling your name. Subscribe and hit the bell. You'll want to hear this one before your next night drive. I've been driving these long-haul routes for 22 years now, mostly through the American West. My name is Frank Miller, and I run freight from the ports of California up through Nevada, Utah, sometimes as far as Idaho. 2 decades on the road, you see things, hear things. Most of it's mundane. Bad drivers, worse weather, the endless hum of the road. But sometimes, something sticks with you. Something that doesn't fit into the neat little boxes of logic or experience. This one, out of northern Nevada, back in '09. Still makes the hair on my arm stand up when I think about it. It was a Tuesday night, late September. Clear sky, cold. The kind of night where the stars look like spilled salt across black velvet. I was on US 93, heading north from Ely, aiming for Wells. This stretch is notorious for being empty. Miles and miles of sagebrush, distant mountains, and not much else. My rig, an older Kenworth T800, was running smooth, engine purring like a contented cat. I had my CB on, Channel 19, as always. It's the unofficial truckers channel, good for traffic updates, asking for a radio check, or just some friendly banter to break the monotony. Usually, out here, it's mostly static, maybe a distant conversation skipping in from hundreds of miles away. I remember that night. The air had a peculiar, almost metallic tang to it, like the smell of dry lightning. It was strong enough that I actually rolled down my window for a moment, just to confirm it wasn't something in my cab. It wasn't unpleasant, just distinct. I often think about my first rig, a beat-up Peterbilt my old man helped me buy, and how he taught me to always keep the squelch just right, so you could hear a whisper, but not drown in hiss. He'd say, "Frankie, the airwaves are like the ocean, full of currents you can't see." I was about 40 miles north of Ely, maybe an hour and a half into the leg. My logbook was up to date, fuel tanks full. I was running a bit ahead of schedule, which was always a good feeling. I had just thought to myself, okay, next big landmark is the turnoff for the Spring Valley State Park. Then it's a straight shot for a while after that. Not even a second later, a voice crackled through the CB. Spring Valley State Park turnoff, then straight shot for a while. It was faint, overlaid with static, but clear enough. And it was my voice. My own inflection, my own slight gravelly tone. I frowned, instinctively reaching for the squelch knob, thinking maybe I had it too low. I turned it up a notch, cutting out some of the hiss. Nothing. I waited. No further transmission. Radio check, Channel 19, I called out, using the standard protocol. Anyone out there, copy? Just static. Not even a distant skip. That was odd. Usually, even in the middle of nowhere, you'd get a response from someone. Even if it was just a loud and clear, "Driver." I tried again. Nothing. I shrugged it off. Probably just some weird atmospheric skip. Or maybe a prankster with a voice modulator. You hear all sorts of strange things on the airwaves. Fatigue can play tricks on you too, and I've been on the road for a solid 10 hours already. I made a mental note to take a longer break at Wells. A few minutes later, I was coming up on a long, sweeping curve. My mind was already planning the next phase of the drive, calculating fuel efficiency, thinking about the coffee I'd get at the truck stop. Okay, easy on this curve, then it's a long downhill grade. Easy on this curve, then it's a long downhill grade. The voice again. My voice. Exactly what I had just thought. This time it was a little clearer, less static. My hand tightened on the steering wheel. This wasn't Skip. Skip doesn't repeat your internal monologue in real time. This wasn't a prank either. How could anyone know what I was thinking? "Who is this?" I demanded into the mic, my voice sharper than I intended. "You got a 10-4 on that, driver?" Silence. Just the low, steady hum of the static. I stared at the CB unit, its green display glowing faintly in the dim cab. I cycled through a few other channels. 17, 21, 23. All clear, just normal static. When I switched back to 19, the static seemed heavier, thicker. I started to feel a prickle of unease. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had spoken aloud without realizing it? No, I was sure I hadn't. I was thinking it, my internal voice. I continued driving, my eyes darting to the CB every few seconds. I decided to test it. I deliberately thought, I need to check my mirrors, make sure my load's secure. I didn't say it. Check my mirrors, make sure my load's secure. The voice, my voice, came through, almost immediately. It was chilling. My heart started to pound. This wasn't normal. This wasn't any kind of radio phenomenon I'd ever encountered in all my years. I'd seen weird stuff, sure. Strange lights in the sky, phantom hitchhikers. But this was personal. It felt like an intrusion. I tried to follow protocol. I checked my antenna connections, gave the coax cable a wiggle. Everything seemed secure. I even pulled over briefly, a few miles past the Spring Valley turnoff, and did a quick visual inspection of the antenna itself. It was fine. No damage, no loose mounts. My SWR meter, which measures the standing wave ratio, essentially how efficiently your antenna is transmitting and receiving, showed a perfectly healthy reading. This wasn't an equipment malfunction. I got back on the road, feeling a cold dread settle in my stomach. The desert stretched out, empty and indifferent. The moon was high now, casting long skeletal shadows of the sparse Joshua trees. I thought about calling my dispatcher, but what would I say? My CB is repeating my thoughts back to me in my own voice? They'd think I'd finally cracked. The voice continued. It wasn't constant, but it would pop up every few minutes, repeating my internal observations, my route decisions, sometimes even a fleeting memory. "Remember that time you almost hit that deer outside of Fallon?" came through the speaker once, and I nearly swerved. It was a specific, minor memory I hadn't thought of in years. I started to get angry, then scared. I tried to outsmart it. I would think one thing, then immediately think another, hoping to confuse whatever this was. It didn't work. It always picked up the first thought, the genuine one. As I neared Lund, a tiny speck of a town, the voice changed. It became more urgent, slightly distorted, still my voice, but with an undercurrent of panic. "Don't go to Wells. Turn off here." "The other way, Frank." There was no turnoff. Not a legitimate one, anyway. Just a faint, unpaved track leading off into the darkness, barely visible in my headlights. It was the kind of track that led to nowhere, or worse, to something you didn't want to find. My protocol for unknown tracks in desolate areas is simple. Avoid them, especially at night. But the voice was so insistent, so me. "Turn now, Frank. Get off the road." The voice was ragged, almost a whisper now, fighting through a sudden surge of static that made my ears ache. My hands were slick on the wheel. I gripped it hard, forcing myself to look straight ahead. Wells was still 20 miles out. I was so close to civilization, to other people, to a place where this nightmare might finally stop. I pushed the mic button down, hard. "No, I'm going to Wells," I yelled into the static, my own voice raw with fear. The only response was a sustained, high-pitched whine that cut through the speaker, followed by a burst of static so loud it was like a physical blow. I slammed my hand down on the CB unit, turning the power off completely. The sudden silence in the cab was deafening, almost as terrifying as the voice had been. I drove the rest of the way to Wells in silence, my heart pounding, my eyes scanning the dark horizon for anything out of place. I didn't stop until I pulled into the brightly lit truck stop, the diesel engines of other rigs a welcome symphony of normalcy. I never turned that CB back on for the rest of that trip. I had it checked out by a specialist when I got back to the yard. They found nothing. Perfectly functional. I still drive that route sometimes. But I never turn on Channel 19 when I do. And I definitely don't think about my next turn until I'm already making it. Some things are better left unheard, especially when they speak with your own voice. I'm Officer David Miller, and I've been with the State Highway Patrol for just under a year. Most of that time has been spent on the graveyard shift, covering the vast stretches of Interstate 17 and the various state routes that spiderweb off it. Sergeant Chen, my training officer, always emphasized that the quiet hours between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. were where you truly learned to trust your instincts, because that's when the unexpected often materialized. It was 3:12 a.m., according to my dash clock, on a Tuesday in late October. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I was on a routine patrol of State Route 34, a 2-lane blacktop that wound through a relatively undeveloped section of the county. The kind of road where deer are a more common sight than other vehicles. My cruiser, Unit 704, was humming along, the only sound apart from the occasional crackle of static from the radio. I'd just passed the old abandoned sawmill, its skeletal frames silhouetted against a sliver of moon, when I saw them. Ahead, maybe a quarter mile, on the right shoulder, were the distinct red glow of tail lights. They were low to the ground, suggesting a sedan or a smaller SUV, and completely stationary. No hazard lights blinking, which was unusual. My training immediately kicked in. Stranded motorist, potential hazard. My first thought was a flat tire, or maybe someone had pulled over to check their phone. I signaled my intentions, flicking on my right turn signal, and began to slow down, easing off the accelerator. My speed dropped from 60 to 45, then 30. Standard procedure. My eyes were fixed on those taillights, assessing the situation. No movement around the vehicle. No one standing outside. As I got closer, maybe 200 yards out, I reached for the mic to call dispatch. Unit 704. I'm approaching a possible disabled vehicle, SR-34. Approximate mile marker 47. That's when it happened. One moment the taillights were there, a solid, unwavering red. The next, they simply weren't. They didn't blink off, didn't dim, didn't fade. They just ceased to exist. It wasn't like someone had turned off the lights. It was like the entire vehicle had been instantaneously removed from the road. The space where they had been was now just the dark, empty shoulder, indistinguishable from the surrounding tree line. I slammed on the brakes, the ABS grinding momentarily as the cruiser lurched to a halt. My heart hammered against my ribs. Scratch that, dispatch. Vehicle no longer visible. Investigating. My voice sounded tighter than I liked. A rookie mistake, letting my surprise show. I should have maintained a more neutral tone. I activated my high beams, then the powerful alley lights on either side of the cruiser, sweeping the area. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the shoulder, the ditch, the dense woods beyond. Nothing. Not a single trace, no car, no skid marks, no debris. The gravel on the shoulder looked undisturbed. It was as if I'd imagined the whole thing. But I hadn't. Those taillights had been clear as day. Solid. Red. I unbuckled my seatbelt, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out of the cruiser. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. The air felt colder out here, a damp chill seeping into my uniform. I pulled my patrol cap tighter. My training came back to me. Secure the scene, assess, report. But what was there to secure? I walked slowly along the shoulder, my boots crunching on the loose gravel. My powerful streamlight cut a bright swath through the darkness, probing every shadow. I walked to where I estimated the vehicle had been, then another 50 yards beyond, then back. I even peered into the shallow ditch, thinking maybe it had rolled down, but there was nothing but overgrown weeds and fallen branches. Not even a broken reflective marker. I remembered Sergeant Chen telling me about a time he found an entire sedan submerged in a culvert that had been invisible from the road. But this was an open shoulder. I spent a good 15 minutes out there, checking, double-checking, feeling increasingly foolish and paranoid. The silence pressed in on me. I kept glancing back at my cruiser, its emergency lights flashing a lonely red and blue against the black backdrop of the woods. I could feel a prickle on the back of my neck, the irrational sensation of being watched. There was a particular patch of thick, gnarled oaks across the road that seemed to absorb all light, becoming an inky black void. For a moment, I thought I saw a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer within that darkness, like heat haze off asphalt, but it vanished when I focused on it. Probably just my eyes playing tricks. Returning to the cruiser, I leaned against the hood, taking a deep breath. My initial thought was that maybe the driver had fixed their issue and driven off incredibly fast, but that didn't explain the instantaneous disappearance of the lights, or the complete lack of sound. No engine starting, no tires on gravel. Nothing. It was a complete violation of physics. I got back in, started the engine, and drove the stretch again, slower this time, my high beams cutting a path. Still nothing. I made a mental note of the exact mile marker. I decided not to file a full, suspicious incident report just yet. I was a rookie. Reporting a phantom car would just get me laughed at, or worse, sent for a psych evaluation. I told dispatch I found no vehicle and resumed patrol. I knew it was a minor deviation from protocol. Anything unexplained should be logged, but the sheer absurdity of it made me hesitate. My stomach churned with a mix of confusion and a cold, creeping unease. I thought about the strong coffee I was going to get at the diner after my shift. a mundane comfort that felt miles away from the weirdness of the road. The rest of the shift was uneventful, but the image of those vanishing taillights was burned into my mind. I couldn't shake it. The next morning, back at the precinct, I was filling out my daily log. Sergeant Chen was reviewing reports, sipping his coffee. "Rough night, Miller?" he asked, noticing my somewhat drawn expression. "Something odd, Sergeant," I replied, deciding to finally mention it. Around 3 a.m., SR-34, near mile marker 47, saw what looked like a disabled vehicle, but it just vanished. No trace. Sergeant Chen paused, his mug halfway to his lips. He slowly lowered it, his gaze sharpening.
"Mile marker 47 on SR-34, he repeated. "Yes, sir. Right after the old sawmill, heading east." He pushed his chair back and walked over to a large wall map of the county, an older, laminated version with handwritten notes and corrections. He traced a finger along SR-34, then stopped around where I'd indicated. His brow furrowed. "Miller," he said, his voice quiet. "That stretch of road. The section you're talking about, between the sawmill and the old county line, it was decommissioned. Almost 20 years ago. There was a bad pileup, a multi-car fatality. They rerouted SR-34 a quarter-mile north to bypass that curve. What you saw? That road hasn't existed as an active route for 2 decades. It's overgrown, inaccessible. You can't even drive a cruiser down it anymore." My blood ran cold. I remembered driving it, clear as day. The smooth asphalt, the painted lines, the distinct mile markers. I remembered the sensation of my tires on the blacktop. "But I was on it, Sergeant. It was paved. I saw the signs." He shook his head slowly. "No, son. You couldn't have been. That section was physically closed off. Barriers put up. Even the asphalt was broken up in places to prevent access. It's just woods now. A local legend even. They call it the Ghost Road sometimes. Said the victims of that crash still try to signal for help out there." I looked at the map, then back at him. My mind replayed the drive, the distinct feel of the road beneath my tires, the clear view of those taillights. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. My cruiser's dashcam, I realized with a sickening lurch, would only show the empty road after I stopped, not the approach with the phantom vehicle. And the GPS would have shown me driving through dense forest. Sergeant Chen just looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Just be careful out there, Miller. Some things, even with all our protocols and training, just don't make sense." I never drove that stretch of SR-34 again after dark. But sometimes, when I'm on a quiet road in the dead of night, I still see those 2 red points of light, suspended in the darkness, waiting. And I wonder, if I had just kept driving, if I had never slowed down, would I still be here? Or would I have joined whatever it was that vanished on that road that no longer exists? I've been a transportation safety investigator for 17 years, specializing in commercial vehicle incidents. My job is to reconstruct what happened, usually after the fact, using everything from skid marks and vehicle damage to electronic logging device data and dashcam footage. Most cases are grim, but predictable. Fatigue, distraction, mechanical failure. What came across my desk last autumn, labeled Incident Report 77-C-90, was anything but. It started with a call from a state trooper out of Montana. A Class 8 hauler, a Kenworth T680, had pulled over on I-90, just east of Missoula. The driver, a man named Carl Jensen, was reportedly in a state of extreme agitation, claiming he'd been driving in circles for an hour, passing mile marker 213 3 times, only for his dashcam to then skip 47 minutes ahead when he finally reached mile marker 214.
The trooper, accustomed to drivers suffering from white line fever or something worse, had still noted the unusual specificity of the claim. My initial thought was a bad batch of coffee, or maybe something stronger. My procedure is always the same: secure the vehicle, impound the electronic devices. Carl's truck was brought into the State Patrol's impound lot, and I flew out the next day. The cab smelled faintly of stale coffee and diesel, a familiar, almost comforting scent that usually precedes a straightforward investigation. I extracted the ELD, the electronic logging device, and the dual-channel dashcam, which recorded both forward-facing road view and an interior cab view. Back at my lab, I uploaded the data. The ELD showed Carl Jensen had been on a legal run, well within his hours of service, with no critical events flagged. His last rest break had been precisely 8 hours prior. The GPS data from the ELD was consistent, a continuous, eastward trajectory on I-90. No sudden stops, no erratic movements, no U-turns. This immediately put Carl's driving in circles claim into question. My internal assumption leaned heavily towards driver fatigue or a stress-induced hallucination. It wouldn't be the first time. I remember once, a driver swore he saw a phantom moose on a clear stretch of highway, only for his ELD to show a perfectly straight line. Then I moved to the dashcam footage. The device was a standard Blackview DR900X2CH, recording 4K at 30 frames per second. I synced the dashcam's internal clock with the ELD's timestamp, a critical step for correlating events. The footage began normally. Carl was driving. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the undulating terrain of western Montana. The road was clear, traffic sparse. I fast-forwarded through the uneventful stretches, looking for anything unusual. At 18:37:03, the dashcam clearly showed mile marker 213. The green sign, white lettering, perfectly legible. Carl muttered something about getting there. Standard. I continued watching. The landscape passed, familiar I-90 scenery, pine forests, rock cuts, glimpses of the Clark Fork River. Then, at 18:48:19, the dashcam again showed mile marker 213. My brow furrowed. I rewound, checked the timestamp. Yes, 18:48:19. The same mile marker. The scenery leading up to it, however, was subtly different. The angle of the sun, the specific configuration of trees, even the small patches of gravel on the shoulder. It was the same sign, but the approach felt like a different take. My initial thought was a glitch, a corrupt file segment looping. I re-extracted the data, ran a checksum verification. No corruption reported. I played it again. Mile marker 213 at 18:37:03. Then, after 11 minutes and 16 seconds of driving, mile marker 213 again at 18:48:19. Carl's expression in the cab view was one of growing confusion, a slight head shake. He mumbled, "Again? What the hell?" The ELD data for this period showed continuous forward motion, no sudden deceleration or changes in direction that would indicate a U-turn. The GPS coordinates were steadily increasing, moving eastward. It was impossible. I took a deep breath, the faint hum of the server racks in the forensics lab a constant drone. This wasn't fatigue. This was data contradiction. I continued watching. At 1900 hours 27, the dashcam showed mile marker 213 a third time. Carl slammed his palm on the steering wheel, a raw, frustrated sound. "No, not again," he yelled, his voice cracking. His eyes in the cab view were wide, frantic. He pulled over almost immediately, his breathing ragged. The ELD showed a rapid but controlled deceleration and stop. This was the point where the impossible became undeniable. 3 distinct instances of passing mile marker 213 within 23 minutes and 24 seconds, according to the dashcam timestamps. Yet the ELD's GPS showed continuous forward progress, covering approximately 25 miles in that same time frame. My usual protocol for reconciling conflicting data involves cross-referencing multiple GPS sources, but the ELD was the primary, legally mandated one. Its data was pristine. The dashcam's visual evidence was equally pristine, showing the same physical sign 3 times, but the surrounding environment was subtly shifting, like a stage set being rearranged for the same scene. Carl sat there, breathing heavily, for what the dashcam recorded as about 2 minutes. He reached for his phone, fumbled with it, then put it down. His hands were shaking. Then, at 19:02:45, the dashcam footage abruptly skipped. The time code jumped. The next frame was stamped 19:49:53. 47 minutes and 8 seconds had vanished. The scene had changed. The sun was lower, the shadows longer, a distinct shift in light quality. And in the foreground, unmistakable, was mile marker 214. I reviewed the jump repeatedly. There was no corruption, no missing file segment, no indication of the camera being turned off and on. It was a clean, instantaneous jump in the time code and the visual data. One frame, 19:02:45, Carl parked at 213. The next, 19:49:53, Carl driving past 214. The ELD data for those missing 47 minutes showed Carl's truck stationary, parked on the shoulder, exactly where he claimed to have pulled over. It did not show him driving the mile between 213 and 214. I called Carl Jensen back in. He looked exhausted, haunted. He reiterated his story, exactly as the dashcam had shown, but with the added terror of the missing time. He swore he'd just sat there, staring at the road, feeling like the world had tilted. He'd tried to call dispatch, but his phone had no service, which was unusual for that stretch of I-90. He said he'd felt a strange hum, a low vibration that seemed to come from everywhere, not just the truck. I hadn't heard any such hum on the dashcam audio, but the road noise was constant. We sent a team to I-90 to physically verify the mile markers. They reported everything was standard. Mile marker 213 was exactly where it should be, a mile before 214. No duplicate signs, no anomalies in the road infrastructure. The GPS coordinates for 213 and 214 were precisely 1 mile apart. I spent weeks on Incident Report 77C90. I cross-referenced satellite imagery, local weather data, even geological survey maps for any seismic activity. Nothing. The ELD and dashcam data remained stubbornly contradictory. The ELD, the irrefutable record of location and time, showed a parked truck for 47 minutes. The dashcam, the visual witness, showed a parked truck at 2:13, then jumped 47 minutes to 2:14. It was as if the truck, or Carl, or the very stretch of I-90 had momentarily existed in two different temporal realities. The data didn't lie, but it also didn't make sense. I closed the case as unexplained temporal anomaly, a classification I'd never had to use before. Carl Jensen, understandably, quit trucking. He still calls me sometimes, just to ask if I ever found out what happened in those missing 47 minutes. I never have. My name is Arthur Jenkins, and I've been a long-haul truck driver for 27 years. Most of that time has been spent on the interstates, crisscrossing the continental U.S., hauling everything from refrigerated produce to oversized industrial components. I've seen every kind of weather the country can throw at a rig, from blinding blizzards in the Rockies to flash floods in the desert. You learn to respect the road, and you learn to trust your instincts. But what happened near Butte, Montana a few winters back challenged everything I thought I knew about both. It was late January, around 02 o'clock, and I was pushing east on I-90, heading for Billings. The weather had been deteriorating steadily since I'd left Missoula. The forecast had called for light snow, but by the time I was west of Butte, it had turned into a relentless sleet, driven by a wind that felt like it was trying to tear the mirrors off my Freightliner. The road was already a slick, snow-packed mess, and visibility was down to maybe 50 yards in the glare of my high beams. My logbook showed I had another 3 hours before I needed to pull over for my mandatory rest, and I was determined to make some headway before the conditions became impossible. The smell of stale coffee and diesel was thick in the cab, a familiar comfort. Through the swirling sleet, I spotted a pair of red tail lights ahead, then another. A convoy. In conditions like these, finding other rigs heading your way is a small blessing. There's safety in numbers, a shared burden of breaking through the weather. I keyed my CB. Eastbound traffic, this is Rig 74 Alpha, approaching from the west. Anyone on Channel 19? A moment of static, then a gruff voice. Rig 74 Alpha, this is Bearclaw. We're a 2-truck convoy heading for Billings. You're welcome to join the line. Conditions are getting ugly. Appreciate it, Bearclaw. I'll slide in behind you. I eased off the accelerator, letting my rig drift back slightly to give myself some room, then adjusted my speed to match theirs. The lead truck, a Peterbilt, had a distinctive yellow cab, and the one behind it was a dark blue Volvo. I settled in about 100 yards behind the Volvo, close enough to see its mud flaps kicking up slush, far enough to avoid its spray. The rhythmic thwack-thwack of the sleet on my windshield became the dominant sound, occasionally punctuated by the low growl of my engine as I maintained speed. We drove like that for what felt like an hour, maybe more. The monotonous drone of the engine, the white-knuckle grip on the wheel, the constant vigilance against black ice. Bearclaw and the other driver, who introduced himself as Bluebird, kept up a sporadic chatter on the CB, mostly about the weather, the road conditions, and the occasional complaint about dispatch. It was standard road talk, grounding and familiar. I remember thinking about a summer drive I'd taken through the Badlands years ago. The sun so bright it hurt your eyes, the road shimmering with heat haze. A stark contrast to the frigid, gray world I was currently navigating. Around 3:30, the sleet seemed to intensify. The wind howled louder, and the visibility dropped even further. I could barely make out the Volvo's taillights, just two faint red blurs in the swirling white. Bearclaw, Bluebird, Conditions are getting pretty hairy back here, I radioed. Visibility's almost zero. Copy that, 7-4 Alpha. Bearclaw's voice crackled, sounding a little more strained. We're holding steady at 40. Just gotta keep pushing through this patch. A few minutes later, something felt off. The Volvo's taillights seemed to be drifting. Not sideways, but up and down, slightly. Like the truck was on uneven ground. Though I knew this stretch of I-90 was relatively flat. I blinked, trying to clear the ice from my own eyes, but the effect persisted. Then, the distance between us seemed to stretch. I pressed the accelerator gently, trying to close the gap, but the Volvo seemed to pull away, its red blurs growing fainter. "Bluebird, you picking up speed?" I asked, a hint of unease creeping into my voice. No response, just static. "Bluebird? Bearclaw? You guys still there?" I tried again, my thumb pressing down hard on the transmit button. More static. A low hissing sound that wasn't just interference. It was like the air itself was draining out of the channel. My heart started to pick up pace. This wasn't right. CBs don't just cut out like that. Not both of them. Not simultaneously. I checked my own radio, fiddling with the squelch and volume, but it seemed fine. The display showed channel 19. Power output was good. I pressed the gas harder, pushing my rig to 50, then 55. The Volvo's taillights were now barely visible, flickering in and out of the sleet. The yellow Peterbilt in the lead was completely gone. I remember feeling a surge of frustration, a professional annoyance. Convoy protocol dictates maintaining communication and visual contact, especially in adverse conditions. This was a complete breakdown. Had they decided to speed up without warning? It was reckless. I kept driving, straining my eyes, trying to pierce the white curtain ahead. The road was still snow-packed, but I felt a strange, almost imperceptible vibration through the floorboards. A low thrumming that wasn't from my own engine. It was subtle, like the resonance from a distant, massive generator, felt more than heard. The air in the cab grew colder despite the heater blasting. I could see my breath, a faint cloud in the dim interior light. Then, just as suddenly as they had begun to pull away, the red blurs of the Volvo's taillights vanished completely. One moment they were there, faint but present. The next, nothing but the swirling white void. I slammed on the brakes, the ABS kicking in with a violent shudder, my rig sliding slightly on the slick surface. I brought the truck to a complete stop, the only sound the idling of my engine and the relentless thwack, thwack of the sleet. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight, a mag light, and stepped out of the cab, pulling my parka tight against the biting wind. The cold hit me like a physical blow, instantly numbing my exposed skin. I walked around the front of my truck, shining the beam into the tempest. Nothing. Just the vast, empty expanse of the interstate, swallowed by the sleet. I walked a few yards down the road, my boots crunching on the fresh snow that was already accumulating. No lights, no sound of distant engines, just the wind and the sleet. My protocol for lost contact in a convoy is to attempt re-establishment on multiple channels, then wait, and if conditions are too dangerous, pull over and wait for daylight. I tried the CB again, cycling through channels 9, 17, 19, 21. Nothing but the same dead static, like a white noise machine turned up too high. I even tried my cell phone, but there was no service out here. I was alone. I spent the rest of the night parked on the shoulder, engine running for heat, trying to rationalize what had happened. Had they taken an exit I hadn't seen? Impossible. I-90 is pretty straight through there, and I hadn't seen any exit signs. Had they sped up so fast I simply lost them? Unlikely, given the road conditions. My own minor mistake had been letting my guard down, assuming the convoy would stick together without me being hyper-vigilant on the CB. I'd been lulled by the presence of other lights. When the first hint of pre-dawn gray finally appeared on the eastern horizon, painting the sleet-laden sky in muted tones, I started my rig and slowly pulled back onto the road. The sleet had died down to a light snow, and visibility was improving rapidly. The wind had also lessened, leaving behind a pristine, undisturbed blanket of fresh snow on the interstate. I drove slowly, scanning the road ahead, looking for any sign of tire tracks other than my own. The snow was a clean slate. My headlights cut through the lingering gloom, illuminating the untouched white. There were no tire tracks from the yellow Peterbilt. No tracks from the dark blue Volvo. Just the deep, distinct impressions of my own dual tires, stretching back into the distance. The only disturbance on the newly fallen snow. It was as if I had been driving alone on a freshly paved, freshly covered road the entire night. The only evidence that any other vehicles had been there was my memory, and the lingering, inexplicable cold that still permeated my cab. I'm Marcus Thorne, a senior forensic investigator with the State Bureau of Investigations, specializing in digital evidence and surveillance systems. For the past 17 years, my job has been to make sense of what cameras see, what microphones hear, and what data trails are left behind. Most of the time it's mundane. Shoplifting, property disputes, the occasional domestic incident. But sometimes, the feeds show you things that defy logic. Things that make the hair on your arm stand up, even after 2 decades of seeing the worst of humanity. This particular call came in late on a Tuesday, just as I was packing up. A remote rest stop off I-81, about an hour and a half north of the main office. The State Highway Patrol had been doing a routine check, found the men's and women's facilities empty, but something was off. They called it eerie, which isn't a term I usually hear from uniformed officers. The dispatch mentioned all doors swinging, and that was enough to pique my interest. No wind, no obvious signs of forced entry, just motion. I arrived on scene around 2340, the patrol car's strobes painting the deserted parking lot in alternating red and blue. The air was still and cold, carrying the faint, sweet scent of pine and exhaust fumes. Officer Miller met me, shivering slightly despite his heavy jacket. "Thorne, thanks for coming out. Place just feels wrong. Any signs of a break-in? Vandalism?" I asked, pulling on my gloves and grabbing my kit. My breath plumed in the frigid night. "Negative. Lock on the main door was secure, windows intact. Just inside." Miller gestured vaguely towards the men's room entrance. I deployed my portable 3D scanner and set up the initial grid points outside, capturing the exterior layout and any potential points of entry or exit. Standard procedure. Then I moved inside. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low, almost imperceptible buzz, casting a harsh, flat light on the pale green tiles. The air was still, heavy with the smell of stale disinfectant, and something else I couldn't quite place. A faint, metallic tang. And there they were. Every single stall door in the men's restroom was gently, almost rhythmically, swinging inward and outward. Not violently, not slamming, but in a slow, deliberate pendulum motion, as if someone had just exited each one in quick succession. There were 6 stalls, 6 doors, all moving. I checked the vents. No draft strong enough to cause that. The main entrance door was closed. I pulled out my thermal imager. The toilet seats, the handles, the walls, all ambient temperature. No residual heat signatures. I ran my hand over a toilet seat. Cold. I checked the sinks. Dry. No water running, no puddles. It was as if a dozen invisible people had just used the facilities and vanished.
Miller, you see this? I asked, my voice low.
Yeah, just like the women's room. Every single one.
He sounded less professional now, more unnerved.
I began my methodical sweep. I started with the sinks, collecting trace evidence, then moved to the stalls. I documented each door's movement with my forensic camera, recording the subtle arcs. This was the kind of detail that could be dismissed as a draft, but the sheer uniformity was troubling. My internal monologue tried to rationalize it. A ventilation system cycling on and off, creating a pressure differential. But the system was off. As I worked my way down the row of stalls, my reflection caught my eye in the large, rectangular mirror above the sinks. I was adjusting the focus on my camera, my brow furrowed in concentration. I blinked. My reflection blinked a fraction of a second later. Not a full, delayed blink, but just enough of a lag to make me pause. I stared. My reflection stared back.
I blinked again, deliberately this time.
1, 2. My reflection's eyelids closed, then opened. My own eyes were already open, focused on the mirror. The lag was minimal, almost imperceptible, but it was there. It was like watching a poorly dubbed film, where the audio and video are just slightly out of sync. A wave of cold washed over me, not from the ambient temperature, but from something deeper. I've seen enough strange things to know when something isn't right. This wasn't a trick of light or an optical illusion. This was a direct, observed anomaly. I moved my head slightly. My reflection mirrored me perfectly, no lag. I raised my hand, perfectly mirrored. Then I blinked again. The delay was back, subtle but distinct. My reflection's eyes seemed to linger closed for a fraction longer than my own. I felt a prickle of unease, a sensation I usually managed to suppress. I was tired, that was it. Long day, late call. My mind was playing tricks.
I rubbed my eyes, a minor mistake in protocol, as it could transfer particulates. But the urge to clear my vision was strong. When I opened them, the reflection was still there, my face pale under the harsh lights. I looked away, forcing myself to focus on the task at hand. This was a crime scene, or at least a highly unusual incident. My job was to document, not to get distracted by subjective phenomena. I finished documenting the stalls, then moved to the mirror, taking high-resolution photos, checking for latent prints, anything. Nothing. Just a perfectly clean, standard-issue mirror. My next step was to check for any surveillance systems. Rest stops sometimes have cameras in the common areas, though rarely inside the restrooms. I found a small, dome-shaped camera mounted discreetly in the ceiling of the main entrance vestibule, covering the entrance to both restrooms and the vending machines. It was an older model, but still operational. Miller, I need to pull the footage from this unit. It's a proprietary system. I'll need to connect directly. He nodded, already moving to secure the area further, placing crime scene do not cross tape across the main entrance. I connected my portable forensic acquisition unit to the camera's DVR, bypassing its internal network for a direct data dump. This was standard practice to prevent any tampering or network interference. The system hummed to life, and I began the transfer process. I always initiate a live stream preview during the dump, just to monitor progress and ensure data integrity. The monitor on my unit flickered, then showed the live feed. Then I scrolled back, looking for any activity around the time the patrol officers reported the swinging doors. I found it. About an hour before they arrived, the footage showed nothing. The doors to both restrooms were closed. Then, almost simultaneously, the doors to the men's room, then the women's, swung open. Then closed. Then swung open again, as if someone had just entered and exited each one. But there was no one. No figures walking in. No figures walking out. Just the doors, moving on their own. My stomach tightened. This was beyond a draft. This was impossible. The footage was clear. No pixelation. No obvious signs of digital manipulation. I fast-forwarded and rewound, trying to catch a glimpse of anything. A shadow, a reflection, anything that could explain the movement. Nothing. Just empty frames, then the doors moving. It reminded me of a time my youngest, Lily, asked me if ghosts were real after watching an old cartoon. And I told her they weren't, that everything had a logical explanation. I wasn't so sure now. I felt a shiver, despite the fact that I was wearing a heavy jacket. I looked up at the camera dome itself, then back at the screen. The footage continued to play, showing the empty vestibule, the vending machines, the swinging doors. I initiated a secure encrypted backup to my field server, a critical protocol for preserving original evidence. The data transfer bar crawled across the screen. Then, the image on my monitor began to distort. First, a subtle ripple, like heat haze. Then, lines of static, growing thicker, faster. The color drained, replaced by a monochrome scramble of pixels. Within seconds, the entire screen was nothing but pure, unadulterated white noise, a blizzard of digital interference. The audio feed, which had been silent, erupted into a deafening hiss. "What the hell?" Miller was beside me, his flashlight beam trembling slightly on the screen. "It's corrupted," I said, my voice flat. "The feed just died." I tried to stop the transfer, to salvage what had already been downloaded, but the system was unresponsive. The data transfer bar froze, stuck at 78%. I tried to access the DVR directly again. Nothing. The unit was dead. Not just unresponsive, but completely powered down. Its indicator lights were dark. I disconnected everything, my hands moving mechanically. The original DVR was now a brick. The partial footage on my field server was just a corrupted file, unreadable. Every attempt to recover it met with the same result, an error message, a digital wall of static. The only thing I had left was my own camera footage of the swinging doors, and my testimony about the reflection. We spent another hour sweeping the rest stop, every inch, every corner, with every piece of equipment we had. We found nothing. No prints, no fibers, no DNA, no signs of life or death. Just the cold, still air, the humming lights, and the lingering scent of disinfectant. The incident report was filed as unexplained anomaly, surveillance system failure. The official conclusion was a system malfunction, possibly due to aging equipment or a power surge. But I knew what I saw.
I knew what that footage showed before it became a storm of white noise. And I knew about the reflection. I still see it sometimes, when I'm tired. That fraction of a second delay in my own eyes, lingering a moment too long. And I still wonder what else might have been looking back. I've been driving 18-wheelers for 23 years now. Cross-country mostly. Coast to coast, north to south. You learn the rhythms of the road, the hum of the engine, the static on the CB. It becomes a second skin, a constant, predictable drone that tells you everything's as it should be. I've seen it all, or so I thought. Blizzards that swallowed the highway whole. Black ice that made the rig feel like a toy. Deer that decided to play chicken at 70 miles an hour. You develop a certain resilience, a belief that you can handle whatever the road throws at you. This was late April, a Tuesday night somewhere in Wyoming on I-80. The stars were out, clear and sharp, like someone had punched holes in a black tarp. My rig, a Freightliner Cascadia, was purring along, steady at 65. The cabin smelled faintly of stale coffee and the pine air freshener I'd hung from the rearview mirror weeks ago. Channel 19 on the CB was mostly quiet, just the occasional crackle or a distant, unintelligible voice. I was pushing through the last leg of my run from Salt Lake to Omaha, tired, but focused. My logbook was up to date, and I was making good time. Mile marker 86 was coming up, a stretch of highway I'd driven hundreds of times. Nothing but open plains, a few scattered ranches, and the endless dark horizon. Then, the static cleared. Not a gradual fade, but an abrupt, almost artificial silence, followed by a voice. It was calm, level, distinctly male. Breaker 19, this is Dispatch Unit 74. Calling for Sierra Tango 9902. Do you copy? My handle is ST9902. It's my company ID. Not something you usually hear over the open channel. Truckers use nicknames, handles. Official dispatch uses encrypted lines or cell phones for sensitive comms. But the voice was clear, authoritative. I keyed the mic. This is ST9902, Unit 74. Go ahead. ST9902, you are ordered to pull over immediately at your current location for an emergency safety inspection. Repeat, emergency safety inspection. Your current coordinates indicate you are approaching mile marker 86. Pull over on the shoulder, engage hazard lights, and await further instruction. Your driver's badge number is 447 Alpha Sierra 01. Confirm receipt. The last part hit me like a cold spray. My driver's badge number. That's not public information. That's on my ID card, my logbook, internal company records. It's not something a random voice on the CB should know. My first thought was a prank. Maybe a new guy at a way station trying to sound official. But the detail, it was too specific. Still, the protocol for an emergency stop, even if suspicious, is to comply, then verify. You don't ignore a direct order that could be legitimate. I remember a similar situation years ago when a state trooper used a CB to pull over a speeder. It was unorthodox but effective. I just assumed this was another one of those rare, strange instances. I was tired, sure, but I trusted my training. Copy that, Unit 74. Pulling over at mile 86. Hazard lights engaged. I eased off the accelerator, checked my mirrors, and guided the rig onto the wide, gravelly shoulder. The crunch of tires on loose stone was loud in the sudden quiet of the cabin. The truck settled, air brakes hissed, and the hazard lights cast an orange pulse against the dark landscape. The silence on the CB was absolute again. No follow-up, no confirmation. Just the hum of the engine idling and the distant, almost imperceptible sound of the wind. My phone was on the dash. I picked it up and dialed my company's dispatch center. It rang twice before Brenda, a dispatcher I'd known for years, answered. ST9902, what's up? Everything okay? Brenda, I just got a call on channel 19. Dispatch, Unit 74. Ordered me to pull over at mile 86 for an emergency inspection. Said my badge number. You know anything about this? There was a pause on Brenda's end, longer than usual. Unit 74? No. ST9902? We don't have a Unit 74 on duty, or any inspection orders out for your rig. Not from us. Not from any state agency we're aware of. And your badge number? That's odd. Are you sure it wasn't a prank? My stomach tightened. Sounded official, Brenda. Too official. And the badge number? Stay put for a minute, she said, her voice now edged with concern. Let me check the logs, call a few numbers. Don't let anyone near your truck until I call you back. If it's a real inspection, they'll have proper ID. I hung up, the phone feeling heavy in my hand. The wind picked up slightly, rattling the cab. Outside, the darkness was profound. No other vehicles were visible on the highway, front or back. I grabbed my heavy-duty mag light from its clip by the door. Professionalism, I told myself. Even if it's a ghost call, I'm stopped. I should do my walk-around inspection just like I would for any legitimate stop. It was a habit, a reflex ingrained over 2 decades. I stepped down from the cab, the cold night air hitting me. It smelled clean, like dust and dry grass. But there was an underlying metallic tang, like old iron. My boots crunched on the gravel. I started at the front, checking the headlights, the grille, the engine compartment latches. The beam of my flashlight cut a stark path through the black, illuminating patches of weeds, discarded trash, the gleaming chrome of the wheels. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. The silence was unnerving. I could hear the faint, rhythmic chirp of crickets, a sound that usually brought a sense of peace, but now only amplified the isolation. As I moved along the side of the trailer, checking the tires, the cargo straps, the brake lines, my breath plumed in the cold. I remembered a time, years ago, when my son, then just a toddler, had insisted on helping me with my pre-trip inspection. He'd shine a tiny plastic flashlight at the tires, mimicking my movements, his face alight with serious purpose. The memory was a stark contrast to the growing unease I felt now, alone on this desolate stretch of road. I was nearing the rear of the trailer when I heard it. A faint, repetitive tap, tap, tap. It wasn't coming from the road or the wind. It was coming from under the trailer, directly beneath the cargo bay. I froze, holding my breath. The maglite beam was steady on the trailer's undercarriage. Nothing. No loose parts. No animal. The tapping stopped. I waited, heart hammering against my ribs, listening for any resumption. Nothing. I tried to rationalize it. A stone kicked up, settling. A loose piece of metal expanding or contracting in the cold.
but the rhythm had been too distinct, too deliberate. Then, the CB crackled back to life. It was the same voice, but now it sounded distorted, like it was coming from a tunnel or underwater. Inspection complete. Proceed ST9902. Resume route. The words hung in the air, echoing in the quiet cab. I scrambled back into the driver's seat, my hands shaking slightly as I keyed the mic. Unit 74, confirm identity. Who are you? Only static. A long, drawn-out hiss. My phone buzzed. It was Brenda. ST9902. I checked everything. No record of Unit 74. No inspection orders. Nothing. Get out of there. Drive. I didn't need to be told twice. I slammed the shifter into drive, released the brakes, and pulled back onto the highway, leaving the gravel shoulder behind. I kept my eyes glued to the rearview mirrors, expecting to see something, anything, materialize in the darkness. But there was nothing, just the endless black and the receding mile marker 86. I reported the incident to my company, then to the state police. They took my statement, checked their own records, and found nothing. No rogue dispatchers, no unexplained radio transmissions, no one named Unit 74. The official report listed it as an unexplained communication anomaly. I still drive that route. Every time I pass mile marker 86, I feel a chill that has nothing to do with the Wyoming night. The hum of the engine, the static on the CB, they don't feel like a second skin anymore. They feel like a thin veil, barely concealing something that knows my name, my number, and exactly where I am. My name is Frank Miller, and I've been driving long haul for 32 years. That's over 3 million miles if you count the double runs, enough to see every stretch of interstate and every back road from coast to coast. I've seen my share of strange things, from phantom hitchhikers to lights in the sky that made no sense. But what happened last spring, just outside of Junction City, Kansas, was different. It wasn't a sighting. It was an interaction. A direct, undeniable interaction with something that shouldn't have been there. It was just past 2 a.m., a Tuesday. I was running a load of automotive parts from Detroit to Denver, pushing hard to make a delivery window. The air was thick and humid, promising a storm later, but for now, it was just oppressive, making the cab feel like a pressure cooker. My eyes were gritty, the kind of tired where the white lines on the asphalt start to shimmer. I was probably running on fumes myself, both literally and figuratively. I remember thinking about a specific diner coffee I used to get in Ohio. Thick and black, the kind that could strip paint. The thought was a small anchor in the growing haze of fatigue. Then I saw it. Off to the right, a familiar silhouette against the pre-dawn gloom. A way station. My internal clock and my memory immediately flagged it. This particular station, I-70 westbound, mile marker 284, had been condemned back in 2003. Structural issues, I heard. They'd torn down the main inspection bay years ago, leaving only the old cracked concrete pad and a crumbling office building, dark and overgrown. But tonight, there it was. A neon sign, faded but unmistakable, flickering above the entrance. 24HR open. My first thought was that my eyes were playing tricks on me. Fatigue does that. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. The sign was still there, buzzing with a faint, irregular hum that I could almost feel through the truck's chassis. It wasn't just flickering. It was shorting, one letter dimming, then another.
then the whole thing going out for a second before sputtering back to life. 24HR open. I knew this station was dead. I'd passed it hundreds of times since it closed. Never a light, never a sign. But the open sign, combined with my bone-deep exhaustion, started to work on me. Maybe they reopened it. Unlikely with the state of the building, but the thought flickered. And the thought of bypassing a potentially open way station, even a ghost one, and risking a fine, was enough to override my better judgment. A momentary lapse, a professional mistake born of sheer exhaustion. I signaled, slowed the rig and eased the Peterbilt off the main highway, the rumble strips grumbling a protest. The entrance ramp was overgrown, weeds pushing through the cracks in the asphalt. The scale house itself was a squat brick building, windows boarded up with plywood that had long since warped and peeled. Rust stained the concrete where old downspouts had failed. This was definitely the condemned station. No doubt about it. Yet, the neon sign continued its erratic dance, casting a sickly green glow on the cracked pavement. I pulled my 80,000-pound rig onto the scales. The metal groaned under the weight, a familiar sound, but here it felt hollow, amplified by the silence. The automated speaker, usually crisp and clear, crackled to life, distorted and tinny. "Driver, please enter your DOT number." I leaned forward, pressing the button on the external console. The plastic was brittle, sun-baked, but it worked. I keyed in my number, 15 digits, practiced 1,000,000 times. The screen, a small LED panel, glowed faintly, displaying the numbers as I typed them. No attendant. No one in the office. Just the flickering sign and the disembodied voice. "Please wait for weight confirmation." I sat there, engine idling, the air brakes hissing softly. I looked at the dark, boarded-up windows of the office building. No movement, no light, just the oppressive silence of the Kansas night, broken only by the cicadas and the occasional distant rumble of a truck on I-70. The air was still, heavy, and carried a faint, stale smell, like old concrete and a hint of something metallic, like rust or old blood. It wasn't the usual diesel and exhaust smell of an active truck stop, more like a tomb. I remembered a time, years ago, when my kids were little. We'd stopped at a roadside diner near here. The smell of frying bacon and maple syrup had filled the air. This was the opposite of that. Then, a soft whirring sound from the console. The receipt slot, usually clean and well-maintained, was caked with dust. A small slip of paper, thermal print, slid out. I reached for it, my fingers brushing against the rough, cold plastic of the dispenser. The receipt was standard. My DOT number, date, time, and then the weight. Steer axle, 12,380 pounds. Drive axle, 34,120 pounds. Trailer axle, 33,500 pounds. Gross weight, 80,000 pounds. Perfectly legal, exactly what I expected. But then I looked closer. Below the weight, in a smaller, almost faded font, was another line. Inspection Bay 3, occupied. My blood ran cold. Inspection Bay 3? This station only ever had one bay, and it had been torn down years ago, and it was certainly not occupied. I looked back at the office building, then at the empty concrete pad where the bay used to be. Nothing. Just the dark, dilapidated structure.
A sudden, sharp crackle from the speaker. "Driver, you are clear to proceed." The voice was flat, devoid of inflection. I stared at the receipt in my hand. The paper felt oddly warm. The 24-hour open sign flickered again, going completely dark for a full 5 seconds, plunging the entrance into near-total blackness, before sputtering back to life, one letter at a time, until it glowed sickly green once more. I didn't hesitate. I threw the Peterbilt into gear, the air brakes releasing with a loud hiss. I didn't even bother to roll up the window. I just wanted out. I pulled away from the scales, the tires crunching on the gravel and weeds, and accelerated down the exit ramp, back towards the interstate. I didn't look in my rearview mirror until I was a good mile down the road. The way station was a dark silhouette against the horizon, but I could still see it. The 24-hour open sign, flickering erratically, a beacon for no one, or for something else entirely. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. The receipt was still in my hand, crumpled now, but the words, "Inspection Bay 3, occupied," were burned into my mind. I still have that receipt, tucked away in my logbook. I've shown it to a few other drivers, old-timers like me. They just shake their heads. No one has an explanation. I've never seen that sign lit up again. And I still pass that stretch of I-70. The old way station is always dark, always silent, always condemned. But I know what happened that night. And I know that something was there, waiting, watching, and it logged me in. My name is John Miller, and I've been a structural engineer for nearly 15 years. My work primarily involves assessing the integrity of bridges, overpasses, and other large-scale civil structures, often in remote, less-traveled areas. It's a job that demands precision, an eye for detail, and a healthy respect for the forces of nature and time. You learn to trust your instruments, your calculations, and your gut. But sometimes, even those things aren't enough. This particular assignment was a routine, low-priority check on an old steel truss bridge spanning the Clearwater River, just shy of the Idaho border. The kind of bridge you see in black and white photos, riveted steel, painted a dull green. My GPS had me on a dirt access road, winding through dense pine forest, the kind of place where the air always smells faintly of damp earth and resin. My truck, a beat-up F-150, bounced along, kicking up dust. The afternoon sun was starting to dip, casting long, distorted shadows through the trees. I remember thinking about the venison chili I'd planned to make that night, a simple, comforting thought. Then, the GPS announced, "Arrived at destination." I slowed, peering through the windshield. Ahead, a bridge. But it wasn't the Clearwater. This bridge was a concrete arch, stark and modern, nothing like the riveted steel I was expecting. And there was no river. Below it, a vast, dry ravine, cracked earth stretching into the twilight. It looked like a scar on the landscape, deep and impossibly wide, as if a river had simply evaporated overnight, taking all its water with it. I checked my tablet, cross-referencing the coordinates with the schematic. The GPS was insistent. This was the location. I zoomed out, zoomed in, tried to refresh the satellite data. Still, the pinpoint hovered over the concrete structure. I sighed, thinking it was just another mapping error, common in these remote areas. I'd seen it before. A mislabeled road, a phantom lake.
As I pulled closer, I noticed it. A low, resonant hum. It vibrated through the truck's chassis, a deep, almost infrasonic thrum that seemed to emanate from the very air. I cut the engine, and the hum remained, a persistent, mechanical pulse. It wasn't the wind, nor was it distant machinery. It felt like the bridge itself was alive, vibrating under an immense, unseen load. I'd felt bridge vibrations before. Traffic, wind shear, even seismic activity. But this was different. It was too uniform, too constant, and there was nothing on the bridge. No cars, no pedestrians, just the empty expanse of concrete and steel. I grabbed my field kit, ultrasonic thickness gauge, crack monitor, a high-lumen flashlight, and my camera. As I stepped out, the hum intensified, resonating in my chest. The air was still, unnaturally so, and a faint, metallic tang hung in the air, like ozone after a lightning strike. The concrete deck felt cool beneath my boots, smooth, almost unnaturally so, for a structure exposed to the elements. I ran my hand along the railing. The vibration was palpable, a constant tremor. I walked to the edge of the bridge, peering down into the ravine. It was deeper than I first thought, the bottom lost in the encroaching gloom. The cracked earth continued as far as the eye could see, a desolate, barren landscape where a river should have been. My schematic clearly showed the clear water, a substantial body of water, flowing directly beneath this point. I checked my phone for service. Nothing, just a single, flickering bar that vanished as quickly as it appeared. All right, this is wrong, I muttered to myself. My protocol dictated that if a structure didn't match the documentation, I was to verify the location and report it. I decided to turn back, find the correct bridge, and deal with this anomaly later. I got back in the truck, fired up the engine, and put it in reverse. As I started to back up, the GPS voice chimed. Recalculating route. I watched the screen. Instead of directing me back the way I came, it drew a new path, a U-turn that would send me straight across the bridge. I scoffed, tapped the screen, and tried to manually input a return route to the nearest highway. The system froze, then reset, defaulting back to the bridge crossing. I tried again, more forcefully. No, damn it, I'm going back. I ignored the GPS and turned the truck around, heading for the dirt road I'd arrived on. But as I drove, the road seemed to stretch, the trees on either side blurring into an endless tunnel. The hum grew louder, a deep, guttural moan that seemed to shake the very ground. I checked the rearview mirror. The bridge was still visible, but it seemed closer than it should be, almost as if it were following me. My heart started to pound. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't a mapping error. I checked my fuel gauge, then my phone again. Still no service. I felt a prickle of unease, a cold dread seeping into my professional certainty. I pulled over, took a deep breath, and tried to rationalize. Fatigue, maybe. Long drive, weird lighting. I took out my paper map, unfolded it, and tried to orient myself. According to the map, the Clearwater River was right here. But it wasn't. And the bridge on the map was the old steel truss, not this concrete monolith. I looked up at the sky. The stars were beginning to appear, but they seemed too bright, too numerous, almost like scattered diamonds on black velvet. And the hum. It was no longer just a vibration. It was a sound that filled the air, a low, resonant chord that seemed to penetrate my bones. It felt like the bridge was singing, a mournful, unending song. I decided to try one more time. I would drive across the bridge. Maybe it was a loop, a detour, and the GPS was simply trying to get me to the other side to reroute properly. It was a long shot, but staying put felt worse.
I put the truck in drive and slowly advanced onto the concrete deck. The hum intensified to a deafening roar as I reached the center span. The truck's internal electronics flickered, the dashboard lights dimming, then flaring. My radio, which had been silent, suddenly crackled with static, then a low, distorted whisper that sounded like 1,000 voices speaking at once. Unintelligible and chilling. I slammed my hand on the power button, but it wouldn't turn off. I glanced over the side of the bridge. The ravine below was now a swirling vortex of shadow, impossibly deep, the cracked earth replaced by an inky blackness that seemed to absorb all light. I couldn't see the bottom, couldn't even guess at its depth. It was just a void, a hungry maw beneath the humming structure. The concrete under my tires felt like it was rippling, a subtle undulation that made the truck sway. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. My professional training screamed at me to identify the source of the vibration, to measure the displacement, to find the structural anomaly. But there was no anomaly. The bridge was the anomaly. It was perfectly sound, yet it defied every law of physics and geography I knew. I reached the other side, the hum receding slightly, but still present. I looked back. The bridge stretched behind me, a concrete arc across an impossible chasm. And ahead, more forest, identical to the one I'd just left, stretching into the endless night. My GPS, still active, immediately rerouted. Turn around when safe, it instructed, and proceed across the bridge. I was trapped. The road ahead was just a continuation of the loop, and the road behind led only to the bridge. The hum was my only companion, a constant, resonant reminder that I was no longer in the world I knew. I sat there, engine idling, the truck vibrating with the bridge's unseen song, the smell of ozone thick in the air. The stars above seemed to wink, cold and indifferent, as the GPS continued to insist I turn around. I'm Officer Thomas Miller, 18 years with the State Patrol, most of it out here on the rural routes, specializing in incident response and the occasional accident reconstruction. You learn to read the road, the weather, and the people who drive it. You also learn when something just doesn't add up, when the facts on the ground defy every piece of training you've ever received. It was just past 0200 hours, a Tuesday in late January. The dispatch came in as a 1050, distressed driver. Mile marker 187 on Highway 70. Conditions were poor. Heavy, wet snow had been falling for hours, accumulating fast, maybe 6 inches already. Visibility was down to a quarter mile, less in gusts. I'd been on patrol since 1900, the hum of the engine and the rhythmic swipe of the wipers almost hypnotic. My patrol cruiser, Unit 317, was warm. But the outside air temperature was dropping fast, probably below zero. I remember thinking about the hot coffee I'd left in the thermos back at the station, the steam rising in the quiet break room. The call detailed a semi-truck, a freightliner, pulled over at a remote emergency turnout. The driver, a Ray Jenkins, was reporting something impossible. That phrase usually meant fatigue, maybe a few too many energy drinks, or a touch of hypothermia blurring the lines of reality. I'd seen it before. I reached the turnout about 10 minutes later. The freightliner was exactly where dispatch said it would be, its amber marker lights glowing softly in the swirling snow, engine idling.
its exhaust plumed thick and white into the frigid air. I pulled in behind it, angling my cruiser to illuminate the rear of the rig with my headlights, then killed the high beams, leaving only the low beams and flashers on. Standard procedure. Stepping out, the cold hit me like a physical blow. The air tasted metallic, sharp. The snow crunched under my boots, a sound that always felt amplified in the quiet vastness of the highway at night. I walked towards the driver's side of the Freightliner. Ray was already out, standing beside his cab, hands shoved deep into his pockets, shoulders hunched. He was a big man, probably in his late 50s, but he looked small and utterly drained. His face, illuminated by my flashlight beam, was pale and etched with a profound weariness I rarely saw, even in accident victims. "Officer," he said, his voice raspy. "Thanks for coming. I know this sounds crazy." "Take it easy, Ray," I said, my breath fogging. "Let's just figure out what's going on. You okay? Any medical issues?" I was running through the checklist in my head. Signs of intoxication, disorientation, injury. He seemed coherent, just deeply shaken. "I'm fine, physically," he replied, rubbing his gloved hands together. "It's what's been behind me. For 200 miles, officer. 200 goddamn miles." He started talking, his words tumbling out, punctuated by shivers that had nothing to do with the cold. He'd been heading east from Cheyenne, on schedule, when about an hour into his run, he noticed it. Another rig. A Peterbilt, he thought, or maybe a Kenworth, but he couldn't be sure. The headlights were too bright, too close. Not just close, but aggressively close, riding his bumper. "I figured it was some rookie or a hotshot trying to make time," Ray explained, gesturing vaguely back down the road. "I tried to get him to back off, flashed my brakes a few times. Nothing. Just kept coming, those high beams burning into my mirrors." He described the unnerving persistence. Every time he sped up, it sped up. Every time he slowed, it slowed. Always the same distance, never varying, never passing. Just a relentless, blinding presence in his rear view. He tried pulling into the right lane on a clear stretch, expecting it to pass, but it just shifted with him, maintaining its position. He even tried pulling over briefly at an earlier rest stop, hoping it would continue on. But the moment he slowed, it slowed too, then pulled in behind him. He'd waited, engine idling, watching his mirrors. But the other truck just sat there, headlights on full. No movement from the cab. After 10 minutes, he'd pulled back onto the highway, and it had followed. "That's when I knew something wasn't right," Ray said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It wasn't just a driver. It felt deliberate, like it was trying to push me." He said he'd kept driving, trying to rationalize it, telling himself it was just a particularly aggressive driver. But the silence from the other truck, the lack of any attempt to communicate, the sheer, unblinking intensity of those headlights for hours on end, had finally broken him. He'd seen some strange things on the road in his 30 years, but nothing like this. "I couldn't take it anymore," he concluded, his gaze fixed on the pristine snow behind his rig. "I slammed on the brakes, pulled off here. Figured I'd get out, walk back, give the driver a piece of my mind." He paused, then took a deep, shuddering breath. But there was nothing. Nothing there, just snow. I nodded,
my mind already formulating the incident report. Fatigue, likely. Or perhaps a mild hallucination brought on by the monotonous drive and the hypnotic glare of distant headlights in a snowstorm. It happens more often than people think. My initial thought was to get him to a motel, get him some rest, perhaps a medical check. "Okay, Ray," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring. "Let's take a look." I walked to the rear of his Freightliner, my flashlight beam cutting a focused circle through the falling snow. The snow was still coming down, light but steady, perfect for showing fresh tracks. I scanned the ground, moving slowly, methodically. My own footprints were clear, leading from my cruiser. Ray's footprints were also visible, leading from his cab to where he stood, and a few steps back towards the road. Beyond Ray's truck, the snow was undisturbed. I walked a full 50 yards back along the turnout, then another 50 yards onto the shoulder of the highway, my boots crunching. The snow was a smooth, unbroken blanket. There were no tire tracks. None. Not even a faint impression. No sign of a heavy vehicle having pulled in behind Ray's Freightliner. No sign of one having pulled away. No tracks leading off into the deep snow beside the road. No indication of a vehicle having swerved or gone off. Just a continuous, pristine expanse of fresh snow. I knelt, shining my light directly onto the surface. The individual snowflakes were still perfectly formed, delicate six-pointed stars, untouched. I ran my gloved hand over the surface. Smooth. The snowfall had been consistent enough that any tracks from even 5 minutes prior would have been visible, albeit softened. Any truck that had been sitting there for 10 minutes, let alone one that had followed for 200 miles and then pulled in, would have left deep, undeniable ruts. I stood up, turning to look back at Ray, who was still standing by his cab, watching me. He hadn't moved. His face was unreadable in the dim light. I walked further back, maybe a quarter mile, scanning both sides of the road, the shoulder, the ditch. Nothing. The only tracks were my own cruiser's, and Ray's rig where it had pulled off the main highway. The snow behind his truck was as smooth and unmarked as a freshly laid sheet. The protocol for documenting tire impressions, for measuring depth and tread patterns, for casting and photographing, was useless here. There was nothing to document. The absence was the only evidence. 200 miles, headlights burning, and then I'm a former electrical engineer, spent 15 years designing communication systems for a major telecom firm before the dot-com bust sent me looking for a new line of work. That was 12 years ago. Now, I drive a Class 8 Freightliner, hauling everything from lumber to electronics across the continent. You'd think the two careers have nothing in common, but out here, alone for days on end, the principles of radio waves and signal integrity still hold a strange fascination. Especially when the standard 40 CB channels start feeling limited. It was a slow Tuesday night, somewhere between Cheyenne and Laramie, the kind of endless black stretch where the only lights are your own and the occasional distant oil rig flare. My rig, a 2018 Cascadia, was humming along, the familiar drone a comfort. I'd been meaning to do it for months, and with a long haul ahead, I finally had the time. My personal CB, a Cobra 29 LTD, had been sitting on the passenger seat, guts exposed. I'd spent the last few hours of daylight in a truck stop parking lot, carefully unsoldering a few resistors and bridging some traces, following a schematic I'd found on an old forum.
The goal was simple: unlock the export bands, the frequencies above and below the standard 26.965 to 27.405 MHz range. Most drivers wouldn't bother, but the engineer in me saw it as a challenge. The dashboard lights cast a dull orange glow across the cabin. My soldering iron was long cold packed away, but the faint, acrid smell of burnt flux still lingered, mixing with the stale coffee scent that was a permanent fixture in my cab. I powered up the modified Cobra. The LED display flickered, then settled. Instead of CH19, it now read 26.885 MHz. I pressed the channel selector and the frequency scrolled, not just through the 40 standard channels, but into the previously inaccessible ranges. I felt a small, almost childish thrill. A successful modification. My hands, calloused from years of gripping a steering wheel, still remembered the delicate touch required for circuit boards. I started scanning, the squelch wide open, letting in every crackle and pop. Most of it was just static, white noise that filled the cab, a constant hiss. I passed through the normal channels, hearing snippets of truckers complaining about speed traps or asking for a smoke report. Then, I ventured lower, into the 26 MHz range. More static, but occasionally, a faint, almost subliminal hum, like a distant power line. I adjusted the RF gain, trying to pull something out of the noise. Nothing coherent. I went higher, past 27.405 MHz, into the 27.5 MHz range. Still, mostly static. I remember thinking, well, that was a waste of a good afternoon. I was tired, had been on the road for 14 hours, and my eyes were starting to blur from the constant focus on the road ahead. I almost turned it off, dismissed the whole endeavor as a fool's errand. That was my mistake, my fatigue leading to a moment of overconfidence that there was nothing out there. Then, at 27.555 MHz, something caught my attention. It wasn't a voice, not exactly. It was more like a breath, a faint, drawn-out exhalation, followed by a barely audible click. I stopped the scan. The static was still there, a constant backdrop. But beneath it, that faint, almost imperceptible sound. I leaned closer to the speaker, turning the volume up. The sound intensified slightly, a low, guttural murmur, like someone trying to speak through a thick cloth, or perhaps very far away. It was deeply unsettling. It wasn't human. Not quite. I grabbed my logbook from the passenger seat, the one where I meticulously recorded my hours, mileage, and cargo manifest numbers. My company, Transcontinental Logistics, was strict about it. Every shipment had a unique alphanumeric identifier. I flipped it open, the pages smelling faintly of diesel and stale paper. The murmur continued. Then it shifted. A distinct, raspy whisper cut through the static, a sound that seemed to originate from between the channels, not on one. It was a single word, elongated, distorted. 7 Delta Niner. My heart gave a jolt. I stared at the CB speaker, then at my logbook. My current manifest, the one for the electronics shipment I was carrying, began with 7DN. I dismissed it immediately. Coincidence. Pure, unadulterated coincidence. My mind was playing tricks on me because I was tired and had just been looking at the logbook. I changed the frequency, scanning rapidly, trying to find it again. I went up, down, past the original 27.555 megahertz. Nothing but static or the occasional distant trucker. I must have imagined it. I went back to 27.555 megahertz. The murmur was still there, faint but undeniable. I listened, my breath held. Then the whisper returned. This time it was clearer, though still raspy, as if the speaker was struggling to form the words. 7, Delta, Niner, 3, Echo, Papa. I froze. 7DN, 3EP. That was the entire manifest number for the shipment in my trailer, the full, specific, unique alphanumeric code. My hand, still holding the logbook, trembled slightly. This wasn't coincidence. This was impossible. I keyed the microphone. "Hello, who is this? You're reading my manifest number." My voice sounded thin, reedy, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the cab and the night. The murmur intensified, a low, buzzing hum that vibrated through the speaker, making the plastic casing feel warm to the touch. The whisper came again, faster this time, a frantic, almost desperate cadence. 7, Delta, Niner, 3, Echo, Papa. Location, 40.08, north. My eyes darted to my GPS unit mounted on the dash. My current coordinates were 40.08 degrees north. It was reading my location, live, in real time. A cold dread settled over me, colder than the Wyoming night air. My training, my engineering background, everything in me screamed that this was impossible. There was no protocol, no known method for a signal to extract such specific, current data from my private logbook and GPS, then broadcast it back to me on an unlicensed frequency. The CB wasn't linked to my truck's systems in any way beyond power. I tried to key the mic again, but my hand felt heavy, paralyzed. The whisper continued, now listing off cargo details, specific items from the manifest that I had only glanced at myself. Microprocessors. Model X870. Units 500. I yanked the power cord from the back of the CB. The display went dark. The static died. The whisper vanished. The sudden silence in the cab was deafening, broken only by the steady hum of the engine and the rush of the wind past the windows. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The logbook lay open on the seat, the manifest number staring up at me. I looked in the rearview mirror, into the impenetrable darkness behind the truck, half expecting to see something following. There was nothing, just the reflection of my own wide, terrified eyes. I didn't turn the radio back on for the rest of the night, or for the entire duration of that trip. When I finally reached my destination, I carefully removed the modifications I'd made to the CB, restoring it to its factory settings. I still have that radio. It sits in a box in my garage. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if it was truly the modification that opened the door, or if something was always there, waiting, just beyond the edges of the normal spectrum, listening, and just needed a way to whisper back.